This is the road through the forest towards Blizna. Now the area was cordoned off, although locals did have a certain amount of access to it. So much so that there are signs warning people, signed by Heinrich Himmler no less, that if they take any ammunition they will be punished. And this is up in Polish and in German. The sign in German was much longer though than the sign in Polish. Also, this area became under the observation of the Ukrainian OUN UPA organization, which is noted for its terrorist activities against the Polish and Jewish populations, particularly in the Wolin massacres, which started in the summer of 1943. In fact, they actually started a bit earlier than that. Now, this is some distance, of course, from Wolin, and the Ukrainian population wasn't particularly large, but this became important because of Ukrainian SS troops that were training here or stationed here. There were also Estonians, as well, of course, as Germans. So this was a training area for new recruits. Units maybe even brought out the line to do some training or whatever. So there was live firing. There was also not just Wehrmacht, but I believe it was also used for the Luftwaffe as well. So the road I just came down, as you can see, is a fire road. That is to say, a road which will be used by the fire department should it so be necessary. And here we have warnings of what you can do and what you can't do, and reminding people to leave the place as they would like to find it. This year I don't think there's much risk of fire in view of the amount of rain there's been, but last year there certainly would have been a bit more of a risk. So I've arrived at this museum, which is far greater than I was expecting. In fact, I thought there were a couple of test sites, you know, some concrete runway or something like that. I didn't expect all this. The museum, I noticed from the sign, cost around 4.2 million zloty. That's about €1 million to do. That was thanks to the European Union, which did it. I did know there was this Park Historyczny, but as I said, I didn't expect anything to be here whatsoever. So let's have a look at it now. So that's the turret of a Panther tank. I think that's a 75mm gun. I don't know. And that's a Polish plane that was manufactured from 1949 to 1996, AN2. And a long history. Does anyone know how to fly one of these? And the roof is like a heater. It's hot, very hot to the touch. So it must be pretty cold once I got up high. That's a V2 rocket. Now, after the RAF got wind of what was going on at Peenemünde, they paid it a visit and destroyed a great deal of the facilities there. In August 1943, the decision was taken to disperse the V2 production, also V1 production, into 3 places. So the first place was where the it was planned and all the rest of it, which took place in Trounsee. The second place where the construction took place, Mittelbau-Dora, near Nordhausen in central Germany. And the third place where it was actually tested and fired and what have you was from here, from Blizna. Now, this rocket, and when you see it like that, it's pretty impressive. There's another one, for example, in the Imperial War Museum in London, and that rocket is like this one here. It's a mock-up, I believe, but all the same it gives an idea of the size and the capacity. Having said that, the reason I believe that this is a completely pointless exercise is because of the amount of effort, the man-hours that went into production. And this wasn't just slave labour. You can't think of slave labour as being free, because these poor slaves had to be rounded up and had to be guarded, and they had to be well, looked after. Perhaps not the right word, but I mean they did require a certain amount of feeding and what have you, and accommodation, as bad as it was. If the production had been put into that of aircraft, particularly jet aircraft, fighter aircraft, they might have been able to stop the Allied bombing. Now, something like that, which carried 8.5 tons of rocket fuel, but a 1-ton warhead, was really quite insignificant compared to the sometimes 1,000 tons of bombs that were raining down on Germany from British and American bombers. So if that 1,000 tons of bombs could have actually been stopped. Now, the technical characteristics of this missile are very impressive. It could reach its maximum distance of 320 kilometers within 5 minutes. It's the first intercontinental, well, maybe intercontinental is the wrong word, but it's the first ballistic missile ever. Indeed, the people who dreamed it up, Wernher von Braun for others, he was headed he was second in command, I think, of NASA, and which allowed Americans to put rockets into space. At the same time, the Soviets managed to track down German experts themselves within their own zone. Now, Nordhausen was actually in East Germany, but it was captured, Mittelbau-Dora was captured by the Americans in April 1945, and until the time came to actually hand it over to the Soviets, they searched the documents, they got rid of all the machinery, they took it out, and so therefore they got a very good head start. But the Soviets weren't all that far behind. They tracked down people involved in the missile research program within their own zone and took them off to a place near Moscow, and that's how the Soviets were able to develop rockets. Now, let's not forget, of course, that it was the Soviet Union which put the first satellite in space in 1957, Sputnik. Now, this weapon was very inaccurate as well, which makes it not a lot of use. It was called, the V for terror in German. And that's the only thing it could be used for. It was a terror weapon. It wasn't much use as a hitting targets. It was aimed, for example, at the Remagen Bridge after it was captured in March 1945. But it couldn't hit targets like that. It was lucky if it hit a target within a 5-kilometre radius of where it was aiming at. So from that point of view, it was, as a weapon, it's pretty useless. There we have the V1, which possibly was a bit better because as a weapon, because it didn't quite use the same resources, but all the same, I mean, if they put it into aircraft or tank production, it would have made far more sense for the Nazis. Now, my mother remembers these things flying over London. In fact, there was a house which was destroyed not so far from my mother's house, and by one of these things in the summer of 1944. Once more, very impressive to look at. Now, a very curious thing about this was the way that pilots who were stationed in Kent and in East Anglia could actually come and destroy them. Obviously, you could try shooting at them, but the best way of getting rid of them was to topple it by they got the plane under the wing and flipped it over, and that upset the gyroscope, and then it came crashing down into the sea. I saw something which said that the cost of a V1 was 100,000 marks to produce one. That may have been a V2, I'm not certain. Now, look at the payload. This is what has to be looked at. And, you know, a bomber carrying that much in the way of bombs, which you have to get far closer to the target, would be much more useful. Of course, a bomber does require somebody to actually aim it, which puts their own life at risk, whereas the people firing these things, their lives were not all that much at risk. But in that, 8.5 tons of fuel to get it going. That's a huge amount. So the liquid oxygen and petroleum jelly, or whatever it was. Anyway, so I have a barrack full of interesting things in there as well. And this place costs £4 water a day, so that's like less than €1. There was lots of people here earlier, so I didn't film. I came back when it was empty because today's the international, this week it's International Youth Days. So people have been coming here from all over the world, and today were people from Ukraine and Czech Republic. Yesterday people from Ecuador. It's a very long way to come. And so there we can see the exit here on the television. Something happened, and all sorts of things inside. So 200 meters into the forest, and there's some remains from the service tower, it says there. So let's see it. I was warned to look out for adders. So this was the launch site of the V2. I say it's the trial launch site. Got a sign here, and we've got somebody's written something in his book. It's Bolesław Mikosz from Krakow. I'll translate this. So in the summer of 1943, I was working as a construction technician for the Vienna-based company Hermann Otto. One day Hermann Otto got a drawing which was that of something which had to be built on the military exercise ground, and it was given the code KK, which means not unknown. I found out that this was secret. I also found out that this was to be built in Blizna. From the drawings which the company got, as far as I can remember, this was to be a wooden building like a tower, which was 5 times 5 meters at its base, and with a height of 12 to 15 meters, according to my memory. From this, I began to suspect that this was to be for a shell, which was really big, 11 meters high and 1.5 meters round. So I managed to get permission to go to Blizna in order to carry out an inspection, and as I said, It was a large wooden assembly hall. So on the 20th of July 1944, when Hitler was having a few problems a few hundred kilometers to the north of here, in the forest too, in Rastenburg, today's Kętrzyn in Poland, the authorities here realized that the Red Army was getting closer and closer, and they had to disassemble everything. So what was here was disassembled, and it was taken to the Tuchola forests, which are today in Poland, and it's not so far from Bydgoszcz, Bromberg as it then was, under Nazi occupation. That's the German name. Anyway, the local Polish resistance found out about this, and they attempted to capture the site, and they managed to capture certain parts of this whole exercise area. Now, earlier the Polish resistance had actually captured an entire V2 missile which had landed in mud and had not exploded, and they disassembled it. Obviously the Germans were out looking for it, but they failed to find it. And from London they were informed what parts the British were interested in, so they sent a Dakota which landed somewhere near Tarnów. They loaded the bits which interested them, which was then taken to Brindisi and back to the UK. Now the Polish resistance, the Home Army, which did this, was, after the war, they were hunted down by the security services of the communist regime, the UB and the NKVD, and many of these people ended up in very heavy imprisonment. Some of them were judicially murdered, and this happened for helping the ally of their ally. Let's remember that by this time the Soviet Union was no longer allied to Poland, because it broke off diplomatic relations once the Katyn massacre was discovered by the Germans in April 1943. The Katyn massacre, which the Soviets themselves had done. And in this is really the tragedy of the entire affair. The V2 as a missile was not particularly effective. I think the worst single loss of life was when it hit a cinema in Antwerp, which that was the largest loss of life, which maybe can't quite remember how many there were. I think about 230 people were killed, which of course is a great deal of people. But there was 1,000 Red Army troops died taking this, and we have to bear in mind the Polish resistance, the amount of people involved in this who also lost their lives as a result of this weapon. The irony is this weapon probably claimed far more lives indirectly than it did directly. Now, one of the people who captured parts of this military exercise area, he had to go out hiding 3 times during the socialist period, even though in 1965 I think it was he got an award, but then even after the decision of 1981 to declare martial law, he had to go in hiding again. And so he died in 2008, so at least he spent his last 19 years in free Poland. But this was the scene of what happened in Poland, in this country, after World War II, as the communist regime attacked the former members of the anti-Nazi resistance and tried to play up the role of the communist resistance, which in effect had done comparatively very little to fight the Nazi invaders. Here we have the remains of the transformer station. When the Nazis took this area for a military exercise zone, they destroyed the houses which were here, except those which were made of brick, which they either took the bits and used the bricks for their own purposes, or alternatively the brick construction was used for other purposes, such as, for example, in the church, somebody told me it was used as a store, or they may have used the buildings for accommodation or whatever. The anchor is the symbol of the resistance, the Home Army, and here this remembers the people from the Home Army units in Dębice, Kobuszowa, Mielec, Sędziszów and Kobczyce, who were helped by local people, foresters and priests, as well as those prisoners and workers from the German work camp in Pustkov, which helped in the intelligence work, finding out about the German weapons V1, V2, which were located in Blizna in this area, and they helped towards the victory over the Third Reich, and let's remember them. That's from the people who live in Blizna and the Ostrów area. So now I'm going to get back in my van. I think I've seen everything here, and I'm going to go towards a place called Opatów. So I've come approximately 1,500 meters further, and here there's a sign which says that this is a place where mobile V2s were launched from. I have been unable to find, of course they're mobile, so they don't actually leave anything behind them, otherwise they wouldn't be mobile. But we do have this interesting sign that shows you where, when they did these tests of the V2, where it ended up. Now I presume that they were aiming for these something, but I mean, you know, they could easily have come down on a town and caused a lot of damage there. But you can see like the range there, it's one of them, Sarnaki, which is almost at Siemiatyce, so that, I mean, that's a very long way. Then Sochachev near Warsaw. Now this is Sarnaki is well over 300 kilometers from here, and that was the one which was captured by the Polish resistance. And incidentally, my GPS is telling me to go down there, and down that road, which is the road to Mielec, and therefore eventually to Warsaw. I think I'll try it along the tarmacked road.